Hello, and welcome to this virtual tour of the Glore Psychiatric Museum. My name is Trevor Tutt. I'm the curator of exhibits here at the St. Joseph Museums Incorporated. Our organization is a union of the St. Joseph Museum, the Black Archives Museum, the Doll Museum, and the Glore Psychiatric Museum, which we'll be touring today. The Glore Psychiatric Museum began in 1968 as an open house at the State Hospital during Mental Health Awareness Week. Superintendent Dr. Liam O'Brien tasked occupational therapist George Glore with creating exhibits telling the history of mental health. Glore worked with members of the staff as well as patients to design the exhibits, which are still on display at the museum today. We continue their mission of telling the history of mental health treatment. The Glore Psychiatric Museum is housed in the surgical wing of the State Hospital No. 2. The State Lunatic Asylum No. 2 was opened in St. Joseph in 1874. It was located 3 miles outside of town at the time, but the city limits soon grew to incorporate the state hospital within the city. It was constructed based on the Kirkbride plan, which allowed for sunlight and fresh air to flow through the buildings, which was thought to help patients. The state hospital utilized experimental treatments like electroshock therapy and lobotomies. Many of these practices did harm, but the experiments helped to further medical knowledge and advance treatments for the future. In the 1950s, psychopharmaceuticals became the norm, and they still are today. Due to the flood of '93, the state government was forced to relocate a correctional facility, and they opted to move it to the State Hospital No. 2. From '93 to '97, that transition took place, and the State Hospital moved across Frederick Avenue to a new location and was renamed the Northwestern Regional Psychiatric Center. During the transition, the Glore Psychiatric Museum was allowed to remain in the surgical wing of the former state hospital, and in 2004 it joined the St. Joseph Museum Incorporated. One of the most popular displays at the Glore Psychiatric Museum is the stomach contents, or PICA display. As the story goes, staff at the state hospital noticed that a patient was ingesting strange items, and one day she complained of stomach pain, so they rushed her to the examining room and they noticed there was a large mass in her stomach. Emergency surgery was performed, and unfortunately the patient passed away during the surgery, but they recovered 1,446 strange items from her stomach. The doctor that performed the autopsy created this mandala out of it, and you can see some of the different items that she ingested. She suffered from a condition known as PICA, which causes patients to ingest items that are not nutritiously valuable. That's the story that we heard. It turns out that the incident actually occurred in 1910, and the patient died before the staff was able to identify the issue. So the items were removed not during surgery, but during her autopsy instead. In 1971, staff at the state hospital noticed a male patient stuffing a piece of paper in the back of a television set in his ward. Fearing that the paper would catch fire, they called the maintenance department, who opened the back of the television and revealed 525 similar letters had been stuffed in the television over the few years that the patient had been there. Each of these letters contained the patient's name, his personal information, as well as the names of the president and the vice president. Each one told the story of how the patient was being held against his will at the state hospital, and that his belongings were held in 2 boxcars which he hoped to use to escape one day. It's believed that the patient believed that the television relayed messages to and from the outside world. One patient believed that by collecting 100,000 cigarette packets, he could turn it in and receive a wheelchair for his ward. The patient was successful in collecting 108,000 cigarette packets, and whenever he inquired to the staff as to how to turn the packets in for the wheelchair, he learned there was no such contest. The staff was so impressed by his dedication that they purchased a wheelchair and donated to his ward on his behalf. We used this exhibit to talk about obsessive compulsive disorder. In 1971, Internationally known Kansas City-based artist Arthur Kraft spent 5 weeks at the state hospital for alcoholism. Arthur Kraft was known for his multitude of artistic pursuits, including painting and sculpture. While he was here, he would take trips to a friend's farm and do commissioned paintings for him, some of those which are on display in our temporary gallery. During his stay, Arthur Kraft visited with fellow patients and staff and used those stories to compile a book known as Sounds of Fury. Kraft later wrote about his experience at the state hospital, including his interactions with fellow patients and staff, in a book called Sounds of Fury. We have his work on display through the summer. The silent voice display is a bed sheet which was embroidered by a patient diagnosed with schizophrenia. It was believed that she was catatonic as she did not interact with the outside world, but by studying the sheet we actually learned that she was quite aware of her surroundings. In the middle of the sheet you can see that she was describing a party that took place at the state hospital, including some of the food and drink that was served there. Studying the sheet allows us to understand what life was like in the state hospital for a patient with schizophrenia. It is also a great example of how art therapy was utilized within the state hospital. Thank you for joining us on this brief virtual tour of the Glore Psychiatric Museum. We hope to see you whenever we open up for our regular hours in the summer.